It's important to realise that focus groups aren't like doing one-on-one interviews. It's not the case that just because you get lots of people into a room at once, you can gather as much data from lots of different people in the same amount of time. A focus group is about the engagement and interactivity of the participants with each other, and that reveals different data, it reveals data in different ways, but it's not the same as having lots of one-on-one conversations. When you're running a focus group, the first thing you want to consider is who's going to be there. Where do you recruit these people from? How do you find them? And how do you make sure that everybody's going to be comfortable sharing and talking in a semi-public session? It may be the case that you're working with an existing group of people who have worked together before, or they know each other through a hobby or social group. But usually they're people who are coming together because they have a commonality around your research question, but don't know each other. And you need to make sure, especially if your research question is a sensitive one, you're asking people to reveal personal information about themselves, that they're happy doing that in front of other people. So when you do the recruitment and the consent form, people need to realise that as well. And it's one of those magic things about focus groups is that sometimes they'll just not work. You'll have a group of people and they won't get on, or there'll be one person who speaks too much, or a series of people who aren't very comfortable at sharing, and you won't get very much data from them. Whereas other times you'll get this instant dynamic, people are talking and sharing, and by talking to each other, and rather than just the facilitator and to the person doing the research, they are able to explore your research topic in a lot more detail and in a dynamic way that reveals a lot more about your research subject. So what things can you do to make sure that focus groups go well, and when you're doing qualitative research, they're really adding a lot to your project? One of the first things is just to make sure that the setup is right. You might want to make sure that you've got the right kind of room that you can use. Oftentimes, especially if you're a student or you're attached to a university, you'll probably use a room that's connected to the university. It might be a tutorial room, a study room, or sometimes libraries have rooms you can book for short sessions, and they can seem ideal for this kind of setting. Just bear in mind who your participants are. If they're people who are not used to going into a university environment, this might feel a bit more formal. It might give a bit more of a kind of ivory tower situation. And always you want to be thinking about the power dynamics. And if you're an academic researcher, getting somebody to come into academia to share something about their lives, it very much feels like you're in control of that process. The other option is community centres. So there may be local village halls, there may be church or other faith groups who have convenient locations, which might be a lot better for your participants. And they'll have small rooms, sometimes with tables and chairs, tea and coffee facilities and things, and that might actually be a lot easier to get to for your participants. There are also in many towns professional rooms for recording focus groups, often hired out at a commercial rate to people doing market research. These can be expensive, but they can be in convenient city centre locations, so it's easy for lots of participants to get to, and they may have special equipment for recording already on hand. Unlike doing a semi-structured interview where you could just do it in someone's home, in a small office, or even in a cafe if you don't mind the noise, finding the right kind of place for a focus group can be a lot more difficult. When you've found a location, it's a good idea to arrive a bit early, check it out, and just look at things like the layout of the room that might impact how the session is going to go. If you have a very formal table like this setting, it might make it feel more like a board meeting rather than an informal discussion, and that will change how people interact with each other. You also might want to do things like making sure that the facilitator is not sitting at the head of the table, so it doesn't feel that they're in charge, but rather just is someone else that's participating and helping facilitate the group. You can also do other things to make people feel a bit more relaxed, like make teas and coffees and basic refreshments, and also make sure you've got a little bit of chat about small talk and the weather before you get into the deep, difficult questions. You might also want to consider whether you're going to do some kind of exercise to help facilitate the chat. So sometimes people will just share things quite naturally, but oftentimes just some kind of material to provide stimulation can be very useful. So for example, you may have a picture to discuss, a short extract of text, or an exercise, like a ranking exercise where people have a series of statements connected to your research topic, and you just need to get everybody to decide which order they are in terms of importance. This can produce other outputs. So not only for each group will you have that set of ordered statements, you'll also have all the discussion and dialogue that went on when people were making those decisions, and that's probably going to be the richest part of the data. One of the other things you should consider is how you're going to record and what you're going to do with the data afterwards. A lot of the time you might want to just use a standard smartphone. That will probably work great in this kind of setting. Any kind of smartphone these days will record good enough audio that you can use even an automated transcription service like Qualitative Transcribe and get a really good transcription out of it. If you've got a dictaphone, it's very useful to have one of those ones which actually has stereo microphones, so it has two different microphones pointing in different directions. That way you can identify which side of the room different speakers came from. And when you come to transcribe the data, or when you just want to refer to it later, it makes it a lot easier to identify who said what in that situation. It can really help have a good session if you just allow everyone to introduce themselves where you come in. This just means that everybody's had a chance to speak and have their voice heard. Everybody else in the room has a little bit of idea about who else is there and who they're talking to. But it also is really useful from the transcript point of view because you'll be able to identify the different voices with a name if you need that later on. You might also want to think about having a video recording of the session. That can be very helpful because you can capture a lot of non-verbal communication, situations where somebody was saying something and everybody else was shaking their head, which will be difficult to capture on the audio. However, you also need to bear in mind that the video recording can be a bit more intimidating for participants. They might feel a bit more shy if there's a camera pointing in their face. And there's also, in terms of the data you collect and the equipment that you might need, probably a lot more overhead for the researcher. However, you can just do a very quick and easy video recording just on a smartphone. Again, most basic smartphones these days will allow you to record good quality video for hours at a time without having to worry about it. And that's also slightly less intrusive than having a very large camera set up in the room. But it may also be possible to capture those kind of things just by taking notes. And just make sure that you also need to think about how you're going to analyze that data as well. Will you use some kind of specialist software to do the analysis on the video transcript as well? How you match that up with the transcript if you're creating one. Just make sure you've got a good idea about what extra the video is going to add to your research data. Facilitating a good focus group is quite an art in itself. It takes quite a bit of practice to learn how to be a good facilitator, how to encourage people who are feeling a bit shy to contribute more, and also how to gently shut down people who might be dominating the conversation or the person who's always the first to answer every question. Getting this balance right can require a bit of practice, and it's often very useful to have a second person helping you in the room. That way you can focus entirely on facilitating and managing the conversation without having to worry about starting and stopping the recording, letting people in who come in late, dealing with spills, or anyone who has an issue needs to leave the room. One of the important things about being a facilitator is also being a good listener. So making sure that you're not just looking elsewhere or writing all the time, but that you are looking at other people, using non-verbal confirmations, so nodding and engaging with the other people, and just gently steering the topic towards your research questions without kind of having a very set script that you're using and very set questions that you want each person to answer. A lot of the time the facilitator for a qualitative focus group will have something like a semi-structured guide or a focus group guide which contains most of the key questions that they want people to engage with. But it's again not the case that you want to go through line by line and make sure each of those questions are answered in order. You want to let the conversation naturally flow as much as possible. So gently guide people onto the next question if possible, but if somebody starts answering something from question 7, feel free to jump forward, just make sure you can go back and make sure all the different topics are covered. That's again another situation where a lot of practice of these sessions makes facilitation a lot easier, and just like with semi-structured interview guides, it's very helpful if you can have that guide absolutely memorized, literally back to front, so that you can remember to ask those questions in any order, however they come up in the natural flow of conversation. And that's the way that you're going to get the best data, to create an environment where everyone feels able to share, where everybody gets a chance for their voice to be heard, and also where the questions aren't very formal or structured, so they can be answered with a yes or no question. Open-ended questions, just as in semi-structured interviews and surveys data, will get you the richest kinds of data. It's also important to understand what you're going to do with the data once you have it. Are you going to have transcripts created from the audio data? Are you going to analyze them in some software or using a particular technique? How are you going to compare across focus groups? Or do you need to do triangulation between focus groups, semi-structured interviews, diaries, or other methods of collecting qualitative data? Make sure you've got a rough idea about that before you start, because it will affect a little bit about how you structure those sessions, the kinds of data you create, whether you think you want video or just audio, or you're going to have transcripts made from this, and all those things will feed back onto the analysis process later. Qualitative software like Qualitative can really help in that analysis process, but first you need to have good data. You need to have a series of good focus groups where you've recorded good audio, there was good rapport between different people, and there's rich data in there to capture and explore. Once you have your data and transcripts, whether you transcribed it yourself or if you've used an automated transcription service like Qualitative Transcribe, you can use Qualitative to explore and analyze your qualitative data. Create codes represented by bubbles, which show the things that you're looking for in your text, and very easily drag and drop text to assign them. You can then compare across your different focus groups and see what kind of commonalities there were, what differences, and start to build grounded theory or whatever kind of analytic approach you want to take. Qualitative is very flexible, very easy to learn, and very affordable, so do give it a free try today. There's a free trial of our automated transcription service as well, with 100 minutes for free. I hope this video has been helpful. Do like and subscribe if you can. Check out some of our other videos which cover not just tutorials for Qualitative, but other aspects of doing qualitative research, including semi-structured interviews. And let us know in the comments if there's any questions you have about focus groups, or if you'd like us to do videos on a different topic in the future.